My name is William. Tonight we enter Rome through private doorways, where whispers decided fates more surely than armies. The story you know speaks of legions and law. The story you rarely hear begins in candlelit rooms, where a hand brushed another hand and policy changed course. Rome's rulers lived in a maze of alliances sealed with marriages and unsealed with secrets. An elegant compliment might shift a vote, a hurried note might redirect a fleet. Desire was never only desire, it was a lever. When too many hands pulled at once, the empire's balance began to tilt. Consider the exemplary wife, praised as guardian of virtue. Public purity often disguised private bargaining. A senator could pledge loyalty in the forum, while his household promised something very different to a rival's niece. The full story behind this might surprise you, because stiff discipline hid an undercurrent of personal deals inked with passion. On the hill, love letters learned to speak in code. Honeyed lines carried instructions. A trinket at a banquet signaled a vote due tomorrow. A change in hairstyle could announce a change in allegiance. This traffic of signals made life unstable and trained leading families to treat affection as a tool. There were unions that looked perfect, yet burned at the center. A governor kept a polished household, yet visited, each dusk, a rival's villa, where a discreet partnership formed over figs and wine. A tribune, slighted in public, found comfort with an ally's wife, and then no longer voted like an ally. Such moments multiplied, and with each quiet betrayal, the republic of manners that supported the empire grew thinner. You might ask, can private affairs truly bend public destinies? They can when the city measures honor through family. A liaison did not remain a private scar, it became a public bruise. Envoys chose sides based on kin more than on law. When bedrooms drew new borders, provinces felt the lines. Yet the truth is even more astonishing. Forbidden love did not merely weaken loyalties, it created factions powered by secrecy. A general who owed his rise to a lover's family felt loyal to the bed as well as to the banner. When pressure came, he protected the pillow first. Garrisons were moved, contracts granted, grain shipments missed their harbors. Citizens blamed corruption, and they were right, but they named the wrong door. Meanwhile, the image of rule frayed. People will endure hardship if they believe their leaders believe in something. They grow angry when they think their leaders believe only in each other. As gossip grew, so did the market for dangerous promises. Men who marched under the banner of reform were sometimes marching toward a promised embrace. There were, too, stories of real devotion that made reckless choices. A commander risked a winter crossing to return not for duty, but for a secret child. Another resigned at the peak of success, rather than break a vow to the woman who guided him. Noble, yes, and costly. Remove a stable hand and a carriage can topple. Now picture a banquet near season's end. Music hangs like perfume. At the main table sit a prince of the blood, a celebrated widow, and a financier whose ships feed the capital. Their smiles are measured. By dawn, the widow has secured a marriage that redirects credit. The financier has promised grain only if a decree passes, and the prince has promised himself to more than one future. In the morning, the city awakes and finds its course nudged by velvet. Why call this a cause of decline? Because when private desire writes public law, law loses its face. Governors are chosen for who can be persuaded, not for who can persevere. Armies learn to wait for messages from bedrooms. The machine still moves, but grit has filled the gears. Stay with me. Next, we will follow three intertwined affairs that pushed Rome past the point of balance. A pact between a prince and a patron's wife that rerouted revenue. A quiet bond between two rival households that turned a frontier. and a final devotion that locked a gate when it should have opened one. The paths begin in pleasure, but they do not end there. Our first thread begins with a prince who was charming in public and restless in private. He owed his comfort to a wealthy patron whose fortune fed the army through a web of contracts. The patron died, and his widow inherited both the accounts and the attention of the prince. Their meetings began as condolences. Soon they became consultations, then confidences. The widow wanted protection for her sons. The prince wanted loyal coin. Love and ledger met across a table scattered with wax tablets. A new decree followed, written to look routine. Grain ships were rerouted to harbors that blessed the widow's friends. A rival governor protested and was answered with smiles and silence. The city felt the change before it saw the plan. Prices rose, tempers curdled, and small riots sparked along the docks. Who signed the order? The minister pointed to the prince pointed to the market, and the widow never spoke beyond the line that duty had guided her. Yet the truth is even more astonishing. A single private promise had reshaped a public artery. From then on, commanders learned to keep one eye on the temple and the other on the townhouse. When storms came, they protected the house that hosted them. Now to the frontier. Two great households held adjacent provinces with an old feud that blazed and cooled like a hearth. A daughter from one house and a son from the other met during a festival where banners hid armed men and music softened fists. They fell into a tender conspiracy. They wrote to each other through a servant who braided thin notes into her hair. Their secret peace treaty began with shared maps and ended with softened patrols. Watchfires burned, but fewer scouts walked the line. One winter morning, a small enemy column crossed, tested the quiet, and did not meet steel. A fort fell without a horn. Each household blamed the other, yet both knew the truth under the accusations. The frontier had followed a kiss rather than a signal. It was retaken after costly weeks, but the cost was not only in men and coin. It was in the new habit of trusting whispers more than orders. The third thread is more intimate and more costly. An older general returned from a hard campaign with scars and a voice hoarse from command. In the capital, he heard a singer at a private supper. She sang in a room the size of a chapel and made the lamps seem brighter. He offered her a house. She offered him a life that felt like quiet water after thunder. When the prince later demanded that the general march again, he asked for a short delay. The answer was sharp: march tonight. He turned to the singer and promised to return soon. She asked him for one thing only, that her quarter remain under guard while he was gone. He sent a troop to watch the gates. When unrest struck the city in his absence, those guards obeyed the last personal order they had heard. They held the gate nearest her street, and a grain depot on the far side burned before help could reach it. The city counted the loss, the prince counted the insult, and the general learned that devotion can mislead a sword. Do these affairs alone explain decline? Number. Empires fall for many reasons, but listen to the pattern. Every thread teaches the same lesson. When private desire becomes the compass, the state's maps blur. Men who should answer the drum begin to answer the door. Governors learn to favor soft obligations over hard ones. The law still exists, but it is rewritten in bedrooms long before it appears in the forum. The full story behind this might surprise you, because the damage was not simply moral, it was mechanical. Patronage moved from public contracts to private courtyards. Units were stationed to guard feelings rather than roads. Intelligence became a rumor trade. Once that market replaced duty, the machine of Rome still turned, but it ground against itself. There were voices that warned against this drift. Some called for a return to sober marriages and clear chains of command. Others whispered that love had always played a part and always would, so the clever horse was to ride it. The second view won without admitting it had won. You could see the victory in little things, in a salute that arrived a moment late, in a convoy that paused for a friendly banquet, in a verdict shaped by who sat in the front row. So how did forbidden love shape the fall? It shifted loyalties from the wide to the narrow, from ideals to individuals, from the city to the circle. It made the empire reliable only where the heart was engaged, and too often the heart was elsewhere. In time the legions still marched, the accounts were still kept, and the laws were still read aloud, but the real orders travelled on notes tied with ribbon. That is how a world ends, not always with a shout, but with a promise made under low lamps and kept too faithfully by people who should have known better.